Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Emergency Preparedness UK. In today's video, we're going to be having a look at pressure canning. Now, pressure canning is mostly common in the United States and other countries. It's not so common in the UK. However, I've done my research on it. This is my first time ever trying it, so I thought I'd bring you guys along for the journey. Let's get into it. Let's start with step one of the process, which is making sure that all of your jars are clean. Okay, so you're going to wash them out, soap and water, make sure there's no residue, make sure that everything's clean, and then do the same with your rings as well. I've already done that. That's why they're on the drying towel there. Let's move on to step two. Firstly, you want to make sure you're starting off with a clean work surface, making sure there's no crumbs, dirt, anything nasty that's been left on there from any previous meals or cooking that you've done. Just giving that spray down with some disinfectant. Before you fully start this process, you want to ensure that you have a sharp knife to cut with. I'm just going to give mine a few quick strokes through the sharpener. This just ensures that you don't injure yourself. It also means you don't have to struggle. There we go. So the first step for this is going to be preparing the vegetables. In this stew, I'm going to be having potatoes, carrots, celery, and white onions, along with the beef and the pork. We just want to make sure that we skim all of these. When you're canning root vegetables, you want to make sure they're skimmed, they've got any of the nasty bits removed, and that they're also washed as well. Same with the carrots. Once all of your potatoes are skinned and they've been washed, it's time to cut them. You want to make sure that you're cutting them into small, manageable pieces, but not so small that they're falling apart inside of the can. Around about this size should do. Now it's done some carrots. So you'll notice that I've been soaking the potatoes in cold water. The reason I'm doing this is to draw out some of the starch that may be in those potatoes. I've heard that if you leave the starch in the potatoes and you don't soak them, they oftentimes go quite mushy in the jar and can go a bit nasty. That's why I've had them in here for about an hour now. All the other veg has been prepped. We've got our onions, we've got our carrots, we've got our celery and our potatoes. Every once in a while, with clean hands, I'm just swishing this around, trying to get any of that surface starch off of there. I'm going to drain these off now, and we're going to start with the rest of the process. Okay, so the first thing you'll notice in the can at the moment is that there are racks at the bottom. That's these things here. Apologies for the noise there. What these do is they stop the direct contact of the jars with the bottom of the pressure canner, where you're going to be having a lot of heat. This stops the jars from cracking and exploding, basically. The next step that we're going to start now is we're going to fill the pressure canner. So it says in all instructions and on most YouTube videos to fill the pressure canner about 2 to 3 inches high, filled with water. So what we're going to do is get one of our mason jars and fill it with 3 quarts of water. Okay, there we go. So that was 3.5 quarts. The water level's raised a fair amount. What we're going to start off with is we're going to put the heat onto 6. That's the highest heat that this goes to. What we're allowing for, because we're going to be adding hot water to the jars, we want to make sure that the water inside of the canner itself is the same as the material inside of the jars. Okay then, once you've cut up all of your meat, you're happy with the way it looks, make sure you cut it into around about inch by inch cubes. I'm going with beef on this run. This was just a joint that I got from the supermarket. It was around 1.1 kilograms. As you can see though, quite a lot of this is fat. Now, I've trimmed it down quite a bit. This was a vein that was going through the middle, a vein of fat. I've trimmed it down so it's a bit more lean. You know, the last thing you want when you're trying to make a convenient meal is to have beef that's mainly fat. I know some people like it, but I personally don't too much, unless it's a barbecue, then I love it. So this is around the size you're aiming for your meat. You can do this with other meats, chicken, pork, pretty much anything else, venison. It's a well-renowned packing method for preserving meats long term. Another interesting point is with this fat here, it can be used to make beef tallow. Beef tallow is effectively the clarified fat from a cow that's been, you know, clarified down a couple of times and then solidified. Is a very, very old recipe for a lot of staple foods around the Native American community. Pemmican, for example, was a very common dish that they used as a survival food. That was rendered down beef fat, along with the dried beef. So I'll make a video at some point on how to make that as well. But in the meantime, yeah, this has been trimmed down. In this case, I'm just going to give it to the dog because he's hungry and he's been begging for it all day. Now that all of your ingredients are ready, it's time to start packing these jars. Okay, the ones I have here are the Kilner quart jars. You can get them in quarts or pints. I chose to go for quarts simply because they're a little bit bigger. I went for the narrow mouth ones because I couldn't actually find any of the wide mouth ones. These were the only ones that were available. One thing I will say is that they do sell funnels for these to help you get everything in a little bit easier. I did have one. I have no clue where it's gone whatsoever. So we're just going to have to play it by ear and make sure that we clean the rims of the jars really well. I'm going to start off with the beef for this. Trying to avoid touching that rim as best as possible. It's okay though, because we can give it a rinse down with vinegar. There we go, there's one. If you run out of meat whilst you're doing this, it's absolutely fine. Just means that you can make a different one, like a vegetable one only. For example, if you've got friends or family over that might be a bit picky, might be a vegetarian, you could make that for them instead. Just to make sure I've got enough for each of these. I'm going to skimp out on the beef a little bit. Please do remember that I'm by no means a professional at this. This is my first time ever doing this. I just thought I'd bring you guys along for the journey. Okay, so around 1 kilogram of beef, by the looks of it, fills 3 of these quart jars. It's around about a quarter of the way up. That's good to know. I think now that I know that, I'm going to prepare the rest of the pork that I have in the fridge, so that I've got enough to fill up these next 3 with meat as well. Okay, so I decided to also use the pork that I had in the fridge and fill them up around a quarter of the way. So we're going to have beef stew and pork stew. What we're going to do now is we're going to add some of the other ingredients that we have. I'm going to start with the second largest part, which is the potatoes. So they've been washed off. They've been standing out to dry for a while, and they feel a lot less starchy. They're not sticky. That's going to be really good for keeping them a little bit fresher inside of these jars, supposedly, if this works. It's not an exact science, I don't think, just making sure that we don't fill the jars too much. There I want. Next, we're going to add some celery. You don't have to add celery, I just like celery. So this was 2 stems of celery. That I got from the shop. Now some carrots. finally some onions. Now I've just chopped these quite coarsely. Simply adding them to get a bit of flavour in there. Okay then, so from what I've read, when you're filling these, you want to make sure that you've got around 1 inch of headspace. So around to this bottom ring here, you can also get one of these measurers to ensure that you are maintaining 1 inch. Yeah, so it has to be approximately 1 inch of air above the food. What we're going to do now is we're going to add some seasonings. You can have whatever seasonings you like. However, because I want these stews to be quite versatile, I'm only going to add basic ones. So we have a small spoon of black pepper, ground black pepper to each. A small amount of garlic. And a small amount of salt. Okay then. Next step at the moment is to boil the kettle and fill them up to around the inch point, making sure that all of the food is fully submerged, and then we're going to be burping them, making sure that there's no air pockets or anything that is obstructing the water from getting to where it needs to be. Okay, so the kettle's now boiled. What we're going to do is, using a tea strainer, every British person has one of these in the house, fits perfectly onto here. We're just going to pour in enough water to submerge the food. We're going to repeat that process all the other jars as well. Watch. The reason I'm using one of these strainers is to make sure that no lime scale gets into this food. Perfect, look at that. Perfect amount. There you go, you can see in there, don't know if you can see actually, a very small bit of lime scale just in the corner. Okay then. We want to make sure that we keep our jars separate. So over here on the right hand side we can have beef. And over here we're going to have the pork. Now, using our measuring stick, what we're going to do is just push down in a few spaces in the jar. Doesn't matter if you break any of the food up in there. This is just making sure that all the water gets where it needs to be. There's one done. Be careful. Jars are hot in this state. Don't know if you saw that there, but there were some air bubbles escaping. That's good. That's what we want. Shows that the water's gotten to where it needs to be. You might have to top them up slightly, as you can see with this one. Let's dip down a little bit. Carrying on with the rest of these. Moving on to the beef now. Just pushing down. Making sure that any air bubbles have been popped and have escaped. There we go. I don't know if you saw that there. There we go, and again. Another one down the middle. That one doesn't really need refilling. And to the second beef one, you can already see some of the air bubbles escaping. Do one down the middle quickly. There we go. One down each side. It looks like it might be only that one that needs refilling slightly. Yeah, to be honest. Yeah, it could do with a little bit more. Final one now. There we go, we've got some air bubbles coming up. Giving it a good shake. Making sure everything's well incorporated together. And then pushing it back down. The whole process of canning really is not that pretty. It's not made to be aesthetically pleasing. It's just made to preserve food. Okay? That's what it's there for. It's not pretty. It's not an exact science. It's trial and error a lot of the time. There we go. That's the one that needs refilling briefly. Try to avoid doing what I just did there, clanging them all together. There we go. That last jar's been filled up to the brim now. The next step, we're nearly there. We're going to get some regular kitchen paper. Fold it into a square. Fold it into another square. And another one. Actually, I won't do it, another one. Wrap it around your finger. Dip the tissue into some vinegar, white vinegar. I couldn't find white vinegar, so I'm using a malt vinegar. Distilled malt vinegar. Give it a really good wipe around the edges, make sure there's no fat, anything that might adhere to the jar. Stop the seals doing their job. A little bit on the inside, but mainly on the rim there. Now the same for the other set. There we go. You can see on there. Something that small, something that simple can stop the lids from actually adhering. It can cause real problems. It can cause the food to spoil. So it's really good that I just caught that there. There we go, another little bit. I believe that's some of the black pepper that might have gone flying when I added the water. So I'm going to give that one an additional little dry there as well. And I'm going to replace the towel I'm using. I'm erring on the side of caution today. I really don't want to mess this up. It'd be a relatively expensive failure if I did. There we go. That's all of the rims cleaned down. What we're going to do now is attach the lids. So these are the Kilner lids. They've got I don't know what the backing is actually, I'll have to find that out. But what we want to do is put these on, make sure they're level, get one of the rings, give it a twist to the right. We only want these to be finger tight. So like that. Don't want to be twisting the wrist, anything like that. Just literally making sure that they're on finger tight. Okay then, it's now time to load them into the pressure canner itself. Okay, so the next step is we're going to load these into the pressure canner. So, pressure canner is currently heating up, it's bubbling slightly. What we're going to do is make sure that we put all of these jars in somewhere that we will remember the order that they're in. So for me, this is the front. I'm going to go for pork on the left-hand side and the beef on the right-hand side. Using one of these handy tools here, a jar grabber, I'm going to lower these into the pressure canner now. Effectively, the reason you want to use one of these is so that you don't burn your hands. You know, the last thing you want to do is be putting your hands into here and then, ouch, you've hurt yourself. There you go. That's how they work. Don't bang them on the pressure canner. Nice and gently in. Okay, so this is what the jars look like inside of the pressure canner. So once all of your cans are in the pressure canner, you've been building the heat for a little while, what you'll start to see is vapor, steam coming out of the release valve that you can see just here. That shows that the water inside is boiling and it's getting rid of all of the air that's inside. That's what will create the pressure. What you're waiting for is for a continuous flow of steam. So we're going to wait for this to pick up a little bit more, and then what we're going to do is add the weight. Quick disclaimer here, don't add the weight before this starts happening. Yeah, so we want a continuous steady flow of steam, and then we want to set a timer for 10 minutes and allow the pressure canner to properly vent. That basically just ensures that all of the air in the pressure canner has been converted to steam, and there'll be enough pressure. So in about maybe a minute, 2 minutes, we're going to set the timer, allow the pressure canner to vent properly, and we'll move on to the next step then. Now that the stream is continuous, we're going to set a timer for 10 minutes, allow the pressure canner to vent, and make sure that all of the air on the inside of the canner has released. That's what the plume looks like. Continuous, steady, it's not sputtering. Okay then, so we'd let that vent for 10 minutes now on the high steam, the continuous steam. Effectively what we're going to do now, with one of these weights, we're going to put it onto the tip there, and we'll see the pressure begin to rise. Okay, so the pressure you need to be canning at depends on your altitude above sea level. So for me, I need to be around 10 to 11 pounds of pressure on here. However, depending on your elevation, this will change. So I'm going to add in a little screen now. And that shows you the pressure that you need to be canning at for your elevation. Let's put this weight on now and see what happens. Woo. That was hot. So you'll see this jiggles, releasing pressure. So the pressure now is going to build. We'll see it begin to rise in a minute. That little arrow is just starting to flicker. It'll take a little while to come up to pressure, but this is where your heat control comes into things a lot. This is where you're going to want to be able to actually know what heat works for you. For me, I'm using an electric induction stove. You can also use, flame for this. You can also use just the standard electric hobs as well. So you can see here now that the pressure gauge is showing around 10 to 11 pounds of pressure. The jiggler is moving with the steam. At the moment, I have it on the hob setting number 6, which is the highest on the bottom left. Personally, this is my first time doing this. I don't know whether it's going to stay at this amount, whether it's going to keep climbing. I'm just going to keep an eye on it for now. If it does start to climb a bit too high, what I'll do is I'll turn down the temperature a little bit, because the temperature controls the pressure. However, if it stays at this amount, that's the amount that I need for my elevation level. So I'll just keep it at that level. So once you've managed to pinpoint exactly where it is on the pressure that you need, and once you've managed to find out what heat you need to achieve that pressure, all you need to do is set a 90-minute timer for meats. Okay, so the recipe that I'm using today takes 90 minutes at pressure. However, please do check your recipes. Make sure that you're using the correct recipe and the correct times for that recipe. Okay, so far at the electric mark 6, it has maintained pressure between 10 and 11 pounds. That's perfect for me, that's fine for my elevation supposedly. The spinner's going, letting off any excess steam. One thing I would like to point out to you though is this part here. I'm not touching it, it's hot. This is one of the safety systems effectively. So what it does is, whilst the canner is pressurised, it will be up like this. Effectively flat along the top. As soon as it's depressurized and it's safe to open, this will have dipped right back to where it was in the starting position. The time is still going. There's still about an hour and 10 minutes left. I'll get back to you as soon as this is done, and I'll tell you the next steps. Okay, so now is probably a good time to mention that if your pressure drops below the recommended amount for your elevation, it's really frustrating, but it means you have to start over again. So with me, if I were doing this recipe again with 90 minutes and my pressure dropped below 10 psi, that would mean that I'd have to restart from the 90 minutes. So reset the timer, effectively sit there and keep my eyes on it like a hawk and make sure that it does actually maintain the correct pressure. Okay then, so we've reached the 90-minute mark. The pressure canner has maintained pressure the whole way through. We have not had to restart anything, which is really brilliant for a first time attempt. What we need to do now is cut the heat, okay? So I want to reiterate before we turn off any heat, that is the only thing that you need to do right now, is turn the heat to 0. You then need to allow the pressure to naturally decrease. Just turn off the heat and do not touch anything, okay? So I'm going to do that now. After the pressure is 0, you need to wait another 10 to 15 minutes. After that, you can crack the valve and remove the weight. Then you wait another 10 more minutes. After that, you crack open the lid, but do not remove it. After another 10 minutes, you remove the lid away from you and allow the jars to sit for 10 minutes. Remove onto a tea towel and leave space between the jars. After this, we're going to leave them for 18 hours to cool. Do not remove the rings. So at the moment, the pressure is nearly halved. It's nearly at 5 psi. Remember that whilst this is cooling down, you can't touch it, you can't move it, you can't jiggle the weight, you can't do anything. I find that the best thing to do, leave a friendly note to your family, knowing that you'd rather you don't move it, just to make sure that no mistakes happen. Okay then, so we've let it cool down for a while. The PSI gauge, as you can see here, is resting on 0. It's been like that for a little while now, around about 10 minutes. You'll also notice here that the plunger, the safety mechanism, has now dipped. You can no longer see that bit on the inside there. It's dropped back to the inside of the canner. So, now that we've waited, we're going to remove the jiggler and then we're going to wait another 5 minutes. Okay, so we're going to remove that, going to wait another 5 minutes. After that, we'll crack the lid and won't open it just yet, but we'll crack it and wait another 10 minutes. Okay then, so we've removed the weight. No steam or anything coming out of the top. What we're going to do now is we're going to crack the lid, but we're not going to remove it. What would happen if you did open the lid now? Well, your jars would siphon. Siphoning is when the liquid is forced out of the jars from a change in pressure and temperature. It completely voids the seal on the jar, and effectively it completely ruins the canning process. So what we're going to do now is very carefully twist the canner open. Give it a little nudge. A little bit of steam might come out. You want to make sure you don't do this too early. Otherwise, you're going to turn your pressure canner into an IED. And it will go flying. Everything will go flying everywhere. Your jars will be ruined. Your face will probably be ruined. Safety is very important with pressure canners. You've got to make sure that you don't open them too early. The safety plunger's down. There's no steam coming out. Gauge is on 0, so I know it's safe to open. Okay guys, it's the moment of truth to look inside now. We're going to be taking off the lid, having a little peek, and then leaving the jars to sit still in the water for another 15 minutes. Let's do this. Nervous. Opening the lid away from you, like so. So that you don't get a rush of vapor in your face. Oh my goodness, that is so cool. I think we may have had a bit of siphoning. The water is slightly discolored. However, I'll have to have a more detailed look into that later on, check which ones have actually siphoned. Otherwise, I'm going to be eating a lot of stew this week. Okay, let's leave these to rest for another 15 minutes, just in the water, and then we'll come back, remove them, have a little look, see what's going on. So these are still resting 15 minutes. However, I think I may have found the one that has siphoned. One definitely has, because it's not just water down there anymore. This one here has a bit of residue on the side. So I'm really thinking it's that one. These ones have splash drops, which indicate that, you know, it's been around it, but hasn't really come from it. So I'm thinking potentially this one here has siphoned. I'll have a look when all of them are out though. Okay then. With our removal tongs, what we're going to do now is we're going to take out the cans. They've been resting for around 15 minutes. It looks as though they're still boiling on the inside. However, that's okay. That's quite normal. What I am going to do is the suspected one that has not sealed properly, I'm going to leave off to one side, just so that I don't get it confused. Yep, so that's that one there. The rest of them, I'm just going to line up in the order of the meat that they are. So we got one pork there. Another pork there. Try not to bang them together. And another pork there. Got one of the beef. Just going to move all of these along, make sure they've got enough space between them. And the final beef. Okay. So if you look in here, there's a fair amount of discoloration. Also quite a bit of oil. But there's a few little chunks that I'm assuming is part of the food. So I'm not overly sure what it is that's gone wrong. It might just be a case of a bad seal. But so far, all of them look okay-ish. Apart from the one that has been separated. So the next step after this is to leave them overnight, allow them to cool down, and effectively just make sure that there's nothing else going on with any of them. Okay. How are we going to know if there's any bad seals? Some of the signs are flat or bulging lids. Okay, so like when you break a jar or when you crack a jar, the lid will pop up very slightly and you'll hear that clicking noise. If you have a flexing lid when it's touched, like I've just said, no ping noise. Apparently when these are cooling, they make like a little ping, like a pop or a ping. Apparently that's quite common. Another sign is really easily being able to remove the ring. You're not having to give it any welly at all. You're just twisting them off, finger loose. Apparently that's a sign of issues. What if it doesn't seal? What do I do then? You can reprocess them within 24 hours, as long as it's caught and as long as it's found. Yeah, you can refrigerate them and use them for around 3 to 4 days at a time. Other than that, they'd start to go bad in the fridge. The most important thing to note is do not store them if the seal is bad. If the seal's bad, do not store them. There's a high risk of bacteria, botulism, foodborne illness that can cause you real problems. At the moment though, leave that reminder note. Ask your family not to touch them. They're very hot. You could injure yourself on these. And additionally, you want to make sure that the seals have an increased chance of actually sealing. So there's enough space between them, usually around 2-3 fingers. Nobody's going to touch them. They're staying out of a cold environment. They're staying in a nice warm kitchen. And we'll check back on these later on. That's the canning process complete. That's what it takes to get your own foods and put them into one of these glass jars and preserve them for a long time. Now, in the US, where this is most common, the US FDA mentions that these cans are usually good for around 2 years. However, I've heard of people eating them years and years down the line, 10, 8 years past their standard sell-by date. So I wouldn't take it, I'll take it with a pinch of salt, basically. Make sure that you are checking when you're opening the cans, smelling them, making sure that they look okay, and obviously testing with your mouth as well, making sure they don't taste rancid. This is what they look like. They really don't look pretty. In fact, they look like something you'd find out of Resident Evil. However, they're nutritious. I think it's worth noting that the longer you store these, the more different the texture will be. They can become a bit more mushy. Nutritionally, if you leave them in the sun, they will decrease in nutrition slightly. That brings us onto the storage. What I've done is I've used the original case that the jars came in and aligned them in a way that I know what's what. I've also labelled them on the top, just mentioning what they actually are. I'm going to make sure I put these somewhere that is dry, has a low air moisture content, so maybe have a dehumidifier next to it, and somewhere that is not in direct sunlight, making sure that no sun can penetrate these jars. That will basically lead to the longest shelf life for these jars. In terms of cost, the jars themselves are relatively pricey. The lids and the seals, if you are reusing jars, are also relatively pricey. The meat itself and the veg itself, it all equals out to around about the same as pre-canned store meats if you're looking at quality. That's the trade-off. It's pretty expensive and time-consuming, and it seems daunting and scary if you don't know what you're doing. However, I know exactly what's gone into this. I know exactly what seasonings are in there. I know exactly the quality of meat that I've put in because I've prepared it myself. So that is a trade-off. However, if you're not overly fussed, I'd say maybe stick to buying the store canned meats because they're a little cheaper and you just have to pick them up, put them in a trolley, and then you can go home rather than sit watching a pressure canner for several hours at a time. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, any recommendations, please feel free to leave a comment. Please like and subscribe as well because it really helps the channel and it's a real boost of confidence for me to keep making these videos. Hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you for joining. Stay prepared.